Well, first I'll thank the nominating committee of the Hall of Fame for this honor. I'm very happy to receive the honor. Thank you very much. You hear me all right? A little closer? Okay. I do want to thank my wife also for such support during our endeavors. And Nancy, would you please stand? What I'll do is explain to you what happened during those early years, the dark ages, where there wasn't much soccer. I'll spend most of the time doing that. But first, I'll let you know how I even got involved in soccer. This happened before I even knew what soccer was. My father used to kick the ball around. He'd keep the ball away from me just using his feet, which I thought was unusual. But I was too young at that time to associate it with the game. I didn't even know anything about the game. But the fact that he was so clever with that is not surprising. He grew up in Scotland playing the game. And after serving in the British Army during World War I, he immigrated to New England and continued to play on high-level amateur soccer teams. There were a good many immigrants back in the 20s when he came. And there were different ethnic teams. We lived 45 miles outside of Boston, and Worcester was nearby. Worcester had a team called the Scans, and I would guess the team at our hometown that my father played on was mostly Scotch-Irish. And so there were clashes, ethnic clashes. My father, I like speaking about my father. I haven't had many opportunities to do that. But he, in addition to soccer, he liked to box for recreation. And he was a very gentle man from the time I knew him. But he combined those two things on the soccer field. He was I think, 135-pound fullback. But he was also the person expected to carry the weight when it came to fighting, and those ethnic groups did fight, much more so than I think today. So that was interesting. He's a very smart man. He was in the library a lot, and then enjoyed going to the gym for boxing, and I still have the gloves that he bought for me as a 6-year-old. The next time I had anything to do with soccer, I went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester. And we had no soccer in high school. We had no youth soccer of any kind. And so I wasn't even thinking soccer, much less thinking I'd be playing on a Tech team. So I went to Tech interested in baseball. That's what I wanted to do besides study. And suddenly I found myself as center forward on the soccer team. And you wonder how that could happen. Well, it could happen in one of two ways. I could be very precocious, which I wasn't, or it could tell you something about the strength of Tech soccer. Tech was not a soccer powerhouse, put it that way. One way you could get on the varsity was through the baseball coach. The baseball coach ran the phys ed classes, and one of the things he had us doing was soccer. And I was out there with a bunch of other kids that probably knew no more than I did. But if you showed pretty good on a day or two, made a couple of goals, he tipped off the soccer coach that maybe here's some more help for you. And that's exactly what happened in my case. And the interesting thing is, or ironic, I guess, Coach McNulty, the baseball coach, was instrumental in me playing soccer but he cut me from the baseball team, which was so going on from there to get into how soccer grew, it goes to our neighborhood first. The boys, it was mainly boys, well, all boys at that time, hit the ball too far to stay in the ball field that they were using. And so we decided to build a field. We got some neighborhood contributions, $5 and $10 contributions, and it amounted to $200 and some. And the budget that I wrote out was just about that amount. And so we started building. It was enough money to get a field graded that the Spencer family let us use in Spencer Estates, and enough to buy 2 soccer balls. And it was rather primitive. Some of our former players here reminded me about the days we spent picking up rocks from that field. That was one of the most memorable things, I guess, about what happened in those days. But very primitive. We had railroad timbers to support basketball goals, of which we had 2. But we had real basketball boards, backboards. And the baseball backstop was made out of donated telephone poles from the telephone company and chicken wire. And so the soccer goals then were made out, the uprights were made out of these same railroad timbers, courtesy of our neighbor who built trestles and bridges for Southern Railroad. And there was some kind of a crossbar. My son Cameron said it was 2 by 8s or something. But anyway, the support for the nets was electrical conduit, and the netting came from tennis nets that I managed to secure from Providence Tennis Club in Charlotte. Nets that they weren't going to use anymore, and they were glad to get rid of them. So it was, as I said, very primitive. But in that fundraising effort, I did say to the parents that one of the things that we would do down there is play a little soccer, that I would teach them some soccer. And they took to it. They really did well, enjoyed it. And at some point, we heard about St. Anne's School kicking the ball around too. A couple of Winthrop professors were over there at recess or lunchtime or something, and so I suggested we have a game. So we had a game between St. Anne and our Christopher Circle group. What happened next is really where the development started. We weren't thinking, let's make this big. We just had the one game and having a good time with it. And then the director of Parks and Recreation at that time, Luther Glenn, called and asked if we could help develop a city program. And so he's responsible for that. And before I go too far with the development, I want to mention Coach Cassida again, because anything I described to you, he was involved. And thank you, Jim, for your many contributions. Would you please stand? So Parks and Rec provided us with 2 soccer balls and said, do something, get something going. And in fact, they weren't the balls that we thought we had ordered. And we had a meeting about it, and they said, make the best of it. So we started with those 2 balls. And we had, first of all, 4 teams. It was difficult to put together 4 teams. We had a rather uncomfortable age range. on the field at the same time. I almost hesitate to mention it, but was from 10 to 15 years old. And I don't know if we should have done that. But one team was Catawba Academy JVs. Another one was the St. Anne team, a team at large, and the group from Christopher Circle. And so we had a season. And we were in control at that point, I would say. But then we were running to catch up after that. It just blossomed. And so we went from 4 to 8 to I don't know how many. We were up in the 30s, I guess, eventually. And not anything we tried to make happen. It just happened. It was just so appealing that that many kids came out. And the group from Christopher Circle, plus some others from the same side of town, they were very successful. They, after that year with 4 teams, and we got to reasonable age groups, they won, and they kept winning, and they won through all the age groups. They never lost. They were tied, but they never lost. So quite an accomplishment there. I took them sometimes out of town, not very often. It wasn't a traveling team. We went to Charlotte for a tournament, and they won. Played a couple of school teams in Charlotte, and they won. And went out of town in another direction. I can't remember the city. But they really did very well. Until the same group was the nucleus of the Rock Hill High, the first Rock Hill High soccer team. And they learned to lose there. They did well, but they did learn to lose. One to their arch rival, Northwestern. But Parks and Recreation focus was on recreational soccer, not travel teams. But they were open to other possibilities. And a man, whose name I don't remember right now, I'm sorry, asked us about developing a travel team because that's what he was used to where he lived before. And so I, as representing Parks and Rec, said sure. And we supported him, I think provided him some transportation with city vehicles. Another thing was the men's team. Well, adult team, but there still were no women involved. And a third thing was a 3-year try at having women's teams, which worked out well, but didn't blossom at that particular time. To just spread soccer as best we could in the Rock Hill area, or York County area, we invited 2 teams from Charlotte. One was Charlotte Soccer Club, made up of young men from many different countries. I remember from the Netherlands, a couple players, and some Middle Eastern players. And very used to playing soccer, very good at it. And another team was connected with Celanese Fibers, where I worked. But they were in Charlotte, and they were made up. It wasn't Celanese, it was another company that combined with Celanese to work in textiles. And they were made up mostly of Brits. And I believe they, were in this country just temporarily. So, long story short, that became our opposition. Well, I wanted to say, after that exhibition, there were some of us that thought, well, why don't we put together a team? And we did, and that we agreed I'd manage the team, and that same Jim Cassida would coach it. And we put it together, and our first game was memorable. We went to Charlotte to play Charlotte Soccer Club with all these international players on a day with an inch of snow on the ground. And turned out to be very interesting. We scored the first 3 goals. I mean, you wouldn't expect that. And so now we're down 3-0. And that might have to sink in for a while. Yes, we had 3 own goals. in that first half. It's hard to believe.